you. Thank you all. Thank you everyone who's sitting down to listen to me or just taking a quick rest and you're forced to listen to me while you're sitting there. Is anyone getting their signatures or photos or anything yet? We got a thumbs up over here. Yeah, it's pretty cool having the Wonka cast here. So yeah, I'm here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're all here, and it's something that's very important and I'm very passionate about, and that's chocolate. Yeah. So the title of my speech, as you heard, is called From Global to Local. And really the reason that I've titled it that is I'm really, so I am a chocolate maker from here in New England, from Manchester, New Hampshire, just a couple of miles north of here, or a couple of hours north of here, I should say. And it's really important to us being a New England brand, giving back to our community, supporting other local businesses, everything that we can do to really, be a part of, our community, reaching out to our neighbors. And it's tough to balance that when it's, you're taking this product, you're taking chocolate that is grown in tropical regions around the center of the earth and nowhere near New England. So I kind of want to make sure that people here in New England sort of have an idea of what chocolate is, where it comes from, and how it gets for something that you're going to take home and share with your family. So we're going to start by talking about cacao and chocolate and where it comes from. So it all starts with this tree called the Theobroma cacao tree. I promise there is not a test. I'm not going to have you memorize any sort of technical names for trees. But Theobroma cacao is this amazing, beautiful, shade-loving tropical plant. And I want to highlight that tropical plant. So Theobroma cacao, if you were to see it, if you were to be walking through the jungle, see it in the wild, and it's full of, the ripe cacao fruit, you're going to be surprised. You think of chocolate, you think of your brown chocolate bar. But it starts as a tropical plant. It's a plant that has, almost all the colors of the rainbow. Bright yellow, bright orange, bright red pods that are going to be growing on that tree. And that's what we're after. We're after those pods because we want to take them down, we want to chop them open, and we want to get the cacao seeds that are inside. And that's really what we're after when we're making chocolate. So it's not the pulp of the fruit or anything, it's those seeds. And that fruit's really interesting. It kind of looks like a cross between, say, an acorn squash and a football, if you can imagine that. So it's about the size of a football. It has a nice thick skin and it kind of has ridges like an acorn squash would. But when you pop that open, you're gonna find those seeds inside and they're gonna have this white pulp on the outside. If anyone is ever lucky enough to travel someplace like Belize or Hawaii where they do sort of agro-tourism and you have an opportunity to go to a cacao plantation, I highly recommend it, to try cacao straight from the pod. It's this light, sweet flavor that pulp has. And it's not, again, what you would expect. It doesn't have that sort of chocolatey flavor. So it was really quite a journey that humans took to be able to take those beans that are inside of that cacao pod and turn it into eventually what chocolate bars are that we know today. It's been around 4,000 years in the archaeological record that humans have been consuming cacao, processing that cacao. It sort of all started in what is modern day Ecuador and then became an important part of the Maya and Aztec cultures. And really a lot of what was developed back historically, it's not drastically different, it's just sort of been improved upon. There's some technology that certain growers use. But really what we're doing is we're taking those seeds, same thing that they did thousands of years ago, and we're going to ferment the beans. So fermenting the beans, normally we think of fermentation, we think of, wine, beer, alcohol. But what we're doing here is we're taking that sweet pulp that has sugars in it. We're going to put the pulp and the beans in these big wooden blocks, or wooden boxes, that are open on the top and have holes on the bottom. Cover it with whatever you have locally. So, the farmers who are locally, maybe banana leaves, palm leaves, whatever. And you're going to sort of essentially cook all of those beans. So you're doing that, you're going to get that nice fermentation flavor. All of this is done, at site where the beans are grown. And you're going to make those seeds inert. So you're no longer, going to just be able to plant that seed and grow a new cacao tree. Then you're going to take those seeds and you're going to dry them. There's a lot of ways you can do this. The chocolate that we eat today, you would think that it would be that with technology we've done something really amazing. A lot of it is just sort of dried on tarps. There may be drying cuts, there may be drying trays that roll in and out depending on the weather. But it's still a pretty basic process. So not too different than what has happened for, hundreds and thousands of years in the process of making cacao. And before we sort of talk about what happens when those beans get sent to us here in the United States, I want to talk a little bit about the farmers who are growing that cacao. I talked before about chocolate is something that I find very personal and something that you can share with your friends and family, and why it's so important for us to be good members of our community. Part of that is, even though the farmers growing cacao are not my next door neighbor, I still want to make sure that they are treated with respect and they get an ethical and fair wage for the work that they are doing. It's incredibly important. A very high percentage of cacao farmers are getting less than $1 a day in payment for their beans. And there's really a movement within craft chocolate, especially bean to bar chocolate makers, making sure they're working directly with farmers and making sure those farmers get an above market value and an ethical wage for the beans that they're growing. It's an incredibly manual process. Still today you think of farmers. I think of a big combine and a tractor and all that kind of stuff. But cacao is very manual. It's done with a machete, is really where it's chopped down off the tree, and those pods are chopped open. So very manual process that these farmers are doing. So I definitely want to highlight that, and I want you guys to think about that as you're actually, trying chocolate today, that all of that sort of started with these farmers. And so, I want to make sure before I'm done today, as I give you guys a little bit of a background of what to look for when you're buying chocolate today. But no matter where you're buying chocolate from, it's really all processed in pretty much the same way. So once those beans are taken from the farm, they're on a ship, brought up quite often through the port of Newark, and brought to the United States, pretty much the same process happens no matter who is actually making the chocolate. It's just on a different scale and different level of precision. So the beans are going to be roasted, very similar to how coffee beans are roasted. And the beans are going to be, you have to take the shells off. So we have a machine called a winnower that takes the shells off of our cocoa beans. And then the big process of what really turns it from just a cocoa bean into chocolate is when we use these really cool, when I'm working with kids, I call them magic cauldrons. They're these big barrels that have a stone bottom and 2 stone wheels that go inside of them. They're called, you'll hear them called grinders, melangers. Basically what they're doing is they're taking those cocoa beans and the sugar that you use and the milk powder, whatever you're adding to your chocolate, and they're gonna grind it and turn it into a paste. So chocolate's not something that you're cooking. We're not adding, beyond maybe just to bring the temperature slightly above room temperature. You're not adding heat to it. You're not cooking it. You're not melting it. It's just friction. That's all that's doing to create that paste and then sort of create a liquid chocolate. So, at Lynn Chocolate, this is where you start to see a lot of variation between makers. The roast profile is a big difference, and then how long you grind for. At Lynn Chocolate, we grind for 5 days. I'm a big believer that chocolate is, taste is almost as important, or texture is almost as important as taste. So doing a nice, smooth chocolate. So that's going on for 5 days. And then the final part is the tempering. So I don't know if anyone here is Great British Bake Off fans or cooking show fans, but if you ever watch any of those shows, you will see that there's many a dessert that just disastrously fails because the chocolate temper goes wrong. And so that is sort of the bane of existence of any of the chocolate makers and chocolatiers here. So I want to sort of explain that a little bit. So if you assume that the fats in cocoa butter, so those molecules of fat that are in the cocoa bean are Legos. Let's imagine that they're Legos. So you have each molecule is, just a nice big open box of Legos. They're not all put together. Each one of those molecules is a new Lego. If you stack those Legos together, in a haphazard way, you're not going to make a very strong tower. It's going to fall apart. There's a bunch of different ways you can stack it as a stair, you can stack it whatever. It's not going to be as strong as the very specific, if you stack them in a nice, straight, solid, square tower, you're going to have a much more stable Lego tower. So if we sort of imagine that we're using chemistry, the magic of chemistry, to build our little cocoa butter tower, to continue the metaphor, basically what we're doing is we're heating that chocolate up to a temperature that chemistry sort of breaks all of those molecules apart, not too hot that you're going to burn it. Then we want to bring that temperature back down to just the right temperature that the molecules get formed and sit nicely in just the right way. Basically what we're going to do is we want to make sure that the chocolate has a nice shiny consistency on the outside. It snaps just delightfully when you snap it, and it melts at just the right temperature. That's important because chocolate is solid at room temperature, but it will melt when it gets to sort of human body temperature. So when you put it in your mouth, it gets that nice, delightful melting sensation. All of that has to do with temper. So if you guys ever have like a piece of chocolate that's been in the back of your fridge for ages and has like that white powder on the top, it's still food safe. It's just sort of out of temper. It might not taste, the texture might be off. It might not have exactly what you're looking for in the chocolate. And all chocolate will eventually, given enough time, come out of temper. So that's basically what's happening. So, the chocolate makers today, we still do a lot of hand tempering, but to do the volume of chocolate that we produce, we have machines that help us do it as well. So that's the final piece that chocolate makers around here do, is we take that tempered chocolate, pour it into molds, and then we wrap our bars and send it out into the world, and come to events like this where we can give it to all of you guys. So it's a really fabulous process. If you guys ever have an opportunity to stop in, whether you're up in New Hampshire and you want to stop in at Lean Chocolate for one of our chocolate tours, or a chocolate tour from another maker, again, highly, highly, highly recommend. So that's the process of chocolate, but before I finish up, I definitely want to send you guys out in the world a little more knowledgeable about where chocolate comes from, how it's made, but also how to be a good consumer of chocolate. So we're going to talk about a few different things. I'm sure about today you've seen chocolate has like a percentage in the on the package. So that percentage, what does that percentage mean? That means that in that bar, if you have a bar that says 72% on the outside of the bar, 72% of all of the cumulative ingredients in that bar are going to be come from the cocoa bean. So that means it's either a straight bean that's been roasted, cocoa butter, cocoa powder. If you see cocoa that's sort of been pre-ground, sometimes makers will put chocolate liquor or chocolate mass on the ingredient. All of those pieces added up together in the bar will be, 70%, 20%, whatever that percentage is on the outside of the bar. That's an important thing to know for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you are looking for milk chocolate by FDA standards has a few things. It has to have a certain type of milk, and it has to have some, other things. But cocoa percentage is only 10% of that bar has to actually come from the cacao bean. That's an important distinction because it is shocking if you are going to go, not really what you're going to buy here, but if you're buying something from like a drugstore, how many places can't even get that 10% threshold. For instance, I bought my daughter some Cadbury cream eggs this Easter. I had one. I hadn't had one in a few years. It was delightfully sweet. The chocolate, however, I'm like, what is happening here? I didn't mean to be dramatic about it, but I'm like, what is happening? Look at the package, and it was listed as a chocolate, I don't remember exactly, it was like chocolate flavored coating or something. It wasn't even, they didn't even meet that minimum for a milk chocolate. The other thing is dark chocolate is, you'll see similar things written on the packaging in dark chocolate as well. The minimum FDA standards is 50% for dark chocolate in the United States, which you will still see things listed as like special dark. And like a Hershey's Special Dark, if you look online, is like a 45%. So they're not calling it a dark chocolate, they're just calling it Special Dark. It's darker than their milk, but not that necessarily FDA standards. So what are the other things in that chocolate? So if you have dark chocolate and it's 75%, so we said that 75% is cacao, that other 25% is gonna be sugar. There might be a few other ingredients. Sometimes some makers will add vanilla to sort of cover up some of the flavors of bad chocolate, or there might be like a PGPR or some sort of preservative put into it. But that 25%, and if it's from a craft chocolate maker, that's gonna be sugar. So if you're looking for a chocolate bar with less sugar, you're gonna go, 75, 85. There are places here that are selling 95, and I had 100% at one of the booths here earlier. Milk chocolate's a little different. If you see something listed at 40%, that does not mean 60% is sugar. It means 60% of it's gonna be that sugar, milk, other flavorings and things that are added to it. And then the other thing I wanna definitely leave you guys with is like words to look for when you're looking at the packaging. There's a real dark side to cacao and chocolate, pun not intended. But when I talked before about how farmers can get paid less than $1 a day, there are things that are, a lot of that can be avoided if you have traceability in your chocolate. And so if you can say, this cacao that I have grown, or that I have chocolate I have made, was grown in Uganda. This was grown in Haiti. This was grown from this particular plantation, this cooperative in, Puerto Rico. Having that traceability allows you to really understand, was there deforestation? You can then go and check, was there deforestation that was done to actually grow this cacao? Were there ethical wages? What is happening on, boots on the ground? A lot of makers are trying to eliminate as many steps in the supply chain as possible. Loon Chocolate is one of them. We try to buy beans directly from farmers or cooperatives whenever possible. Sometimes, for instance, we have a Haiti bar, so I'm not going to Haiti right now. And so we work with a broker who is able to provide us that information with boots on the ground. So having that traceability gives you a real sense of understanding of where those beans come from and what's happening. And also talk to chocolate makers. So, people will sometimes ask me oh, I don't see that you have fair trade certification on your bars. I feel honestly, all of our beans are fair trade certified or fair trade in practice. I would never buy anything that was not fair trade in practice. But fair trade has been really watered down by some of the big, Nestle's, big corporations. I don't feel like it means anything anymore. So it's really, really hard as a consumer to wanting to buy ethical chocolate and knowing well, you wrote ethical, or there's an elephant on the picture. It must be great. It must be good for the environment. And that's why events like this are great. You can talk to the chocolate makers, you can talk to the chocolatiers about where their cacao is coming from, where their chocolate is coming from. And like I said, things to look out for to really know that your chocolate is coming from a really great source is that single origin, or talking about ethical practices, and just sort of making sure that that if you talk to the chocolate makers, that they can tell you, where their chocolate is coming from. But that being said, all of the chocolate I'm sure is making here, that's more something to be aware of for grocery store chocolate. All of this chocolate, all the vendors I've ever talked to, are really aware of this in their process. So a couple more things. I know I've been going for, all right, not too bad. I can talk about chocolate for a long time. I don't want to keep you guys here for 2 hours. But a couple other questions that I always get that I want to touch base on. Difference between cocoa and cacao is a question that I get all the time. Essentially, they mean the same thing. Traditionally, cacao is just the either French or Spanish pronunciation of cocoa. So same thing. It's often considered, if it's before it has been processed, it's considered cacao. And after it's been, sort of roasted and processed, it's been considered cocoa. That being said, there are almost more exceptions to that rule than there are. So essentially in modern day practice, they're essentially mean the exact same thing. And other than that, the most important thing to do when buying chocolate and enjoying chocolate is just exactly that. Take your time. This is a great, amazing place where we're at today, that you get to try chocolate from so many different vendors from all over the world, and chocolate turned in, added to all these other products. So it's hard to have a bad day at a chocolate expo. So I'm so glad you guys took a few minutes out of your day at this chocolate expo today to come listen to me. So that is all I have today. But if there are any questions that anyone has. Excellent. So the question was how long, about grinding. What is the industry standard of grinding? Excellent question. I guess I don't know specifically, if there is truly an industry standard or what that would be. If you have, sometimes people will come to me and say, oh, I was in Belize on vacation and I had chocolate. It was delicious, but it was really gritty. If chocolate is produced in sort of the traditional, hand ground process, it's never going to be as smooth as when you actually have a mechanical intervention. And so the 5 days that we do, definitely on the longer end. There are also different ways you can grind. We use stone grinders, melangers, but there's ball mills. There's all sorts of different crazy ways that you can do it. So that will adjust the time as well. So it kind of depends on the equipment and, personal preference. Any more questions?
Here, I have a microphone. This will make it easier.
Sorry.
What about cutting down the forestation efforts while also protecting the cocoa?
Like deforestation and protection of the cacao?
Yeah, deforestation is a big problem when it comes to cacao, especially, depending on which stat you look at, between 70 and 90% of the world's cacao comes from Western Africa. And in Western Africa, so in the countries of Ivory Coast and Uganda, is where most cacao comes from. And that's where deforestation has had the biggest negative impact. Chocolate's had the biggest negative impact on deforestation. Even if, I know some of the big guys like the Nestle's are trying to, they've made pledges to kind of get away from that practice, within the next 5 to 10 years. And there's been a big improvement in it. However, at the end of the day, these farmers are getting paid so little that they're just not following the rules. They're just will go into the nature preserves in these countries and they burn the existing trees and then they grow cacao trees in their place. Which is a real shame because cacao, when done properly in certain varieties, can be beautifully shade grown. In fact, between about 80% of the cacao that we use at Loon Chocolate is all shade grown cacao. You can really do it in a really sustainable way. But what happens with the deforestation in the cacao is if there's so many extra steps in the supply chain that it's like laundering money. You're essentially laundering cacao beans. That they get brought in, mixed in these big warehouses with cacao brought from all over, from different regions. And that can, and it's hard to know where that cacao is coming from. Was it really grown in a sustainable way? And to avoid that, it goes back to what I was talking about before, the traceability of cacao. I know, so again, we're a bean to bar chocolate maker, so we're starting from the beans. So I can tell you, every country that those beans come from, I know how many farmers are part of these collectives. Being able to know that information, it's much harder for the cacao to be sort of lost in that process. So you can really trace it. And I know the big names, Tony's Chocolonely, if you guys are familiar with them, they're a big name in the industry trying to really push back. But even though that's their whole platform, their whole brand is to be ethically sourced chocolate, because they're such a big name and they're buying bulk cacao, they're really struggling right now with identifying and making sure that all of that chocolate is grown ethically. So it's a problem, but we're working on it in the cacao industry. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you guys. If you do come up with something later or you want to try some of our chocolate at Loon Chocolate, we're in the the aisle that's sort of just on my left over here. Stop by, try some of our chocolate, and I can, you know, like I said, if you come up with any other questions you didn't get an opportunity to ask, I'm more than happy to talk to you about all that.
Thank you so much, Rachel. We really appreciate your presentation today. Can everybody give a big round of applause for Rachel?
Thank you.
And as it is 11 o'clock, our kids zone is officially open. We have balloon twisting and face painting for the kids. We also have our scavenger hunt going on all throughout the day. Make sure you participate in that. Super fun prizes. And we are going to have more presentations throughout the day here, so stick around by the main stage for lots more fun. Thank you guys.